Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is Chapter 29.
Chapter 29. Mara Joy had not lied about being pregnant. No one could tell when they saw the slim girl always dressed in the latest fashions, but when she was naked, Chad could see a tiny bulge had taken over her flat stomach. As much as Chad wanted to get excited about the baby, he couldn't. The more Mara Joy looked pregnant, the more trapped he felt. The sun shimmered off the freshly bloomed flowers of the season, and a gentle breeze carried with it a sense of new beginnings. Chad swept the floor inside the family-run grocery store, his soft hands showing signs of labor. His father, Neil, stood behind the checkout counter, watching proudly as his son did his duties. Through all their hard work, Neil had finally achieved his lifelong dream, both of his sons running the business together like he had envisioned since they were little boys. Neil had wanted to become a soldier until he was denied enlistment because of his bad eyesight. And Chad was an entirely different story. Who knew what this boy wanted to do with his life? What Neil did know was Chad marrying Mara Joy, the boy was forced to support a family. Since Chad had no skills to speak of, he had no choice but to work at the family grocery store. It was a good living, an honest living. Chad hated every minute of it. He watched out the window as his old friends drove by, their laughter echoing through the parking lot as he stacked canned goods. He grabbed another can of beans and dropped it into the cardboard box with a thud. The thought of joining them sent a pang of longing through his heart. Occasionally, one of them would walk through Willis Grocers to exchange a few words and catch up, but those visits were becoming infrequent. Chad was a married man. They were still single, wanting to do things like partying and courting girls. Chad just wasn't fun anymore. His friends' abandonment hurt him, but how could he blame them? He'd probably do the same thing if one of them were in his situation. Everything was different now, and it always would be. Mara Joy beamed with pure delight, her teacup in both hands, as she looked at her female family members gathered around the kitchen table. Her mother smiled back at her. Mara Joy's cheeks were flushed, and her bright eyes sparkled with even more confidence that seemed to have blossomed since marrying Chad. Jo Beth felt a warm sense of comfort settle over her as her earlier reservations about the union faded. Anything that made Mara Joy this happy couldn't be all bad. She is a woman now. A wistful smile crossed her lips as Jo Beth glanced out the window at the blue sky. Memories of Alan cradling little Mara Joy flooded back to her. The sense of awe and wonder as they looked upon this beautiful baby girl who was thrust upon them, forcing them to become a family. Her thoughts turned to what life would have been like if that tiny miracle had never come into their lives, and she shuddered when she realized how different things may have been. Every second with Alan since then had been like a life-saving elixir, treasured beyond measure and savored for its pure joy. He filled Jo Beth with love, contentment, and hope with his very presence. She smiled to herself, thinking of her husband's sweet caresses that morning, and felt a blush rise up her neck. Though years had passed since their wedding day, their love burned like wildfire, igniting the night with their passion. Many years of marriage, and yet every day felt like their first. Alan never failed to bring a smile of contentment to Jo Beth's lips in every aspect of their lives. Glancing at Mara Joy, she beamed inside, praying that her daughter would experience the same kind of inexhaustible love that she shared with Alan. If Mara Joy could ever feel as happy as Jo Beth was with her husband, nothing else would matter. Her life would be complete. Mara Joy ran her hands down the front of her light purple dress, carefully tucking in any stray fabric. She watched with a certain kind of satisfaction as the fabric stretched to accommodate the growing bump of her pregnancy. The delicate hue accentuated the deep color of her eyes and made them look even brighter against her porcelain skin. "Look at us 3 old married women! What more could we want than this?" Mara Joy sighed as she relaxed deeper into her chair. Joanna rolled her eyes at Constance, who stifled back a laugh behind her hand. Mara Joy noticed her sisters laughing at her expense, but brushed it off. She was a married woman, and soon she was going to be a mother of Chad's child. They were just impudent little girls compared to her. What did it matter what these 2 fools thought of her? Their trivial lives were pathetic compared to the life she had planned for herself and Chad. She lifted her cup of tea to her lips, suddenly feeling a little queasy. She'd felt little pains in her abdomen earlier that morning and made a mental note to talk to the doctor the following day. She sipped the warm liquid, letting it slide down her throat, hoping it would ease the increasing discomfort that seemed to suddenly come over her. Jo Beth couldn't help noticing Mara Joy suddenly becoming very pale. "Those girls," she thought, "are going to hear it from me." She glared at Joanna and Constance, relaying her feelings clearly. Feeling guilty that their mother had caught them, Joanna and Constance sulked in their chairs, ashamed. Mara Joy watched the scene play out in front of her, but couldn't really enjoy it. She was feeling increasingly ill. The night before, she had felt the same churning in her stomach. If she had thought about it, she would have realized that it was a feeling which had been going on for a week, getting stronger and stronger every day. A sharp pain pierced through her lower abdomen. "Ah!" Mara Joy squealed in agony as she grasped the small orb of her stomach protectively. Every head in the tiny kitchen swiveled to face the pale young woman. Jo Beth leapt to her feet, sending the chair skidding backward. She hurried towards Mara Joy, whose face had paled, and her mouth was pulled tight with distress. Her entire body quivered in response to the pain. "Mama! My God! Something is wrong!" Mara Joy shouted out, knocking her steaming tea to the floor. She stared numbly at the liquid quickly running down through the planks of the hardwood floor, and seized her stomach as another sharp pain slashed through her. She looked up into her mother's frightened face and clutched her hand tightly. Everything began to go black, and then there was nothing. Just the faint sounds of Jo Beth calling out her name. "Doctor, what is wrong with my daughter?" Jo Beth asked as she waited impatiently in the doorway of Mara Joy's old bedroom. She had been standing there waiting since the small, bald man arrived shortly after Mara Joy fainted. Shauna laid a hand on Jo Beth's shoulder and whispered soothing words. Still, Jo Beth couldn't relax until the doctor emerged from the room with the news that Mara Joy was out of danger. "She is going to be fine, Mrs. Benson," the plump doctor said, rubbing his creased forehead. He raced all the way there after the second eldest daughter had arrived to summon him. He felt beat after what he had just faced. Wiping his forehead with a hanky, he turned back to the frantic woman beside him. "I am sorry, but she lost the baby," he said. The younger woman with the pale blonde hair stood and swiftly put her arm around the astonished Mrs. Benson. He hadn't seen the pale woman sitting in the chair nearby. By the way she held on to the shocked mother, it was plain to see the 2 women were close. "Baby!" Jo Beth spit out. A lump started to form in her throat. She clutched Shauna's hand tightly. "We didn't know she was with child." Stunned, she spoke more to Shauna than the doctor. He stood uncomfortably before the 2 women. The pale younger woman turned a questioning face to him. "Doctor?" she asked in a soft, confused voice. He shook his head. "I am sorry. It sometimes happens," he replied to the pale woman. Shauna nodded and held tightly to JoBeth. "Can I see her?" JoBeth stood straight and pulled herself together. She had to be strong for Mara Joy. If anyone knew what she would be feeling right now, it would be her. Although it had been a long time since she had lost her little son, the pain was still there, like a dull ache. It had taken a long time to fill the emptiness in her heart from losing that child. With each baby she had, the pain lessened, starting when she was given the opportunity to raise Mara Joy as her own. When Alan Michael was born, tears of joy streamed down her face as the midwife placed a healthy baby boy in her arms. Her heart felt complete, as if all was right with the world after years of mourning for the child taken too soon.
"Yes, but don't upset her. She needs comfort now,"
he said.
"She has lost a lot of blood and needs to build up her strength."
JoBeth nodded and wiped away the fresh tears. Shauna returned to the chair in the hall to sit and wait as JoBeth entered the bedroom. "Doctor?" Joanna stopped the short, heavy man as he opened the front door to leave. She had been waiting patiently for him since he told her mother about Mara Joy's miscarriage. Something was forming in her mind, and the doctor's answer would give her the truth she already believed. Constance, who had been waiting with her sister, came to stand beside Joanna. He turned to the two girls standing before him. Now, these two girls looked like sisters, he thought to himself, not like the goddess in the room upstairs. He flushed when he thought of the poor creature he had just left. My God, he thought. The poor girl had just delivered a dead fetus and nearly died in the process. He recalled the young woman's enormous anguish as he broke the horrible news that her pregnancy had ended.
Yes, yes,
he shuddered, feeling sorrow for the devastated young woman upstairs. The older girl's eyes quizzed him. He could feel her reading his thoughts, and he wanted desperately to leave this house. "How far along was my sister?" Joanna asked, her hands resting on her hips. There was no point in beating around the bush. The doctor was obviously uncomfortable and would flee without giving her the information she needed if she pussyfooted around. He looked at the girl, who could be 13 or 14, and shuddered again. Was he suddenly, at this advancing age, becoming a pervert? The youngster before him was no raving beauty like her sister upstairs, but there was something about her, too. He looked at the girl, about 2 years younger, standing behind the other. He sighed, relieved. She was still a child. He felt nothing. "Doctor?" Joanna started to become annoyed. What was it with men that they had a hard time looking at her face? Was she that dull that they couldn't give her the decency to answer her questions?
3 months, possibly 4.
He placed his hat on his head. Funny, she didn't say anything. He looked again at the older girl and felt his loins pull.
"Goodbye, girls."
He flushed, disgusted, and ran out of the house as fast as he could, hoping he would never lay eyes on either sister again. "Why, that," Constance whispered. "No wonder they got married so suddenly." She turned to Joanna, who was deep in thought, with a smile spreading over her face. Constance smiled too. "Shall we tell Mama?" She beamed, her hands clutching together. "Of course not, silly," Joanna simpered at her younger sister. "Mama would be blind if she didn't figure it out for herself by now. Besides, she will forgive her darling Mara Joy in an instant. No, we have to be patient. But we will get her. We have to get her. This is just more fuel for the fire. We need to be smart about this, Constance. Mara Joy has always been one step ahead of us. We have to think like her, be one step ahead of her. Constance looked at her sister as she squeezed her hand tightly, a smile spreading across her face. Let's go out to the shed. I have some ideas to toss around to you, and I don't want anyone interrupting us. Constance eagerly nodded and stepped outside, squinting in the sudden brightness that washed away all thoughts of Mara Joy's miscarriage. She followed Joanna as she moved across the yard, her steps lit with joy. She paused for a second, recoiling how cheerfully the two of them were behaving, almost relishing in the misery of their sister. A shadow crossed over Constance as Joanna turned to her, urging her to hurry, her steps light and airy as she started to skip towards the shed. Constance's stomach lurched, a feeling of guilt and darkness overtaking her. This felt wrong, very wrong. The sun shone down on Joanna's face, the light emphasizing her features and bringing a broad smile to her lips. Constance felt a wave of warmth spread through her body as she forced away her darker thoughts. She quickened her pace as she followed Joanna towards the shed. We have to get all the information we can use against her first. Then we damage her with something really significant to her and her alone, Joanna remarked, sitting on a stack of wood. They were in the shed just outside the back of their home. Constance was fiddling with some hay she sat on, looking anxiously at Joanna. She seemed to be thinking again, rolling Joanna's words around in her head. The shed was small and damp, and although the girls were sitting across the room from each other, their knees were nearly touching. What could really hurt her? Joanna tapped her cheek with her index finger. I know! Constance squealed, jumping to her feet and tripping on a piece of wood. She stumbled right onto Joanna's legs. Oh, this is brilliant. This is too brilliant. She jumped up, brushing the straw off her shorts. Joanna sat looking at Constance, egging her on with a huge smile, ignoring the pain in her legs caused by her clumsy sister. But you will have to do it because you are the oldest, Constance said, more to herself than Joanna. Plans were already formulating in her mind, and she no longer took notice of Joanna's waiting impatiently for her to reply. Well, what? Joanna squealed, jumping up and shaking Constance out of her thoughts. She looked at her sister with a wicked smile creeping swiftly across her face. Joanna felt like hitting Constance. The suspense was killing her. If Constance had an idea, then it would work. She was the smartest in the family. But what did Joanna's age have to do with her sister's schemes? What's Mara Joy the proudest of? Or, should I say, who is she the proudest of? Constance asked coyly, resting her hands on Joanna's legs. She leaned forward, propelling Joanna on, pressing all her weight down on her legs. Joanna stood, wide-eyed, unable to answer. Chad, of course, Constance said matter-of-factly, standing and taking the straw out of her blonde curls. Joanna stared, mouth opened, confused. Chad? What could I do to take Chad away from Mara Joy? She thought back to the young man. He had seemed lost on his wedding night, oblivious to the whole affair. Become Chad's lover. Constance avoided Joanna's astounded face and continued. You see how she brags about her marriage. We have just found out that it is all a sham. They obviously got married because she was pregnant. What better way to ruin Mara Joy than to expose her marriage for the joke that it is? Steal Chad away from her, become his mistress. Joanna looked wide-eyed at Constance, unable to believe what she heard. Her mouth suddenly felt dry and pasty. His lover? Me? You can do it, Joanna. With time. Constance paused. You're too young right now. You should be at least 16 or 17. Then you will have developed pretty much into the woman you will be. You will have to get to know him, be friendly to him. That will be hard since your first meeting was a disaster. Joanna nodded, a sly smirk tickling the corner of her mouth, remembering her outburst. Constance continued. But it could work. There is no baby anymore, and if that was the reason they were married, she shrugged, then getting married was a waste. I don't know if I could do it. It's so extreme. Joanna twisted her fingers painfully. To be his lover? I don't much like him, to be honest. Well, that is the only thing that would hurt Mara Joy. Think about it. There is nothing else you could do to hurt her. Joanna lowered her eyes. How badly did she want to get back at Mara Joy? Constance reached out and touched her arm. Listen, you don't have to make up your mind right now. There is time. You never know. Maybe Chad is a decent person. Just because he married Mara Joy doesn't mean he is totally ruined. He is cute. Joanna thought of Chad standing against the wall the night of the wedding. His unkempt brown hair hung a bit too long over his eyes. He was tall and lean, with just enough muscle definition, broad-shouldered but not bulky, leanly muscled, like a swimmer. A strange, fluttery feeling twisted in her stomach. Her heart raced and she felt a tingling sensation climb up her spine. She thought of his strong jawline and felt an unexpected pang of attraction. All right, I will do it. Constance clapped her hands and hugged Joanna tightly. She stood silently, taking in her sister's plan as Constance rambled on, her words washing over Joanna in a dull roar. The room seemed to spin, and she felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, ready to take a step into the abyss. She felt weird, unreal, like she had just made a pact with the devil, sealing her fate, with no way to turn back. Mama! Mama! Mara Joy sobbed sincerely from her little bed. The cheery bedroom, decorated in pink and blue, seemed too buoyant for the events that had taken place within its walls. JoBeth stood at the doorway, wanting to seize her daughter and sweep her away to some time in the future. The tears she had hoped not to shed in front of Mara Joy were again welling up. My baby is dead. Mara Joy looked at her mother. Dead, Mama, dead, she cried, reaching out for JoBeth. She ran to her daughter's aid and fell at the foot of Mara Joy's childhood bed. Why didn't you tell me, lovey? Mara Joy sat up, and new tears slid down her already streaked face. I didn't know, Mara Joy lied, reaching for her mother's hand. I didn't know Chad's child was growing in my womb. Now, JoBeth said, cuddling the weeping girl. She placed her arms around Mara Joy's shivering shoulders and held her damp head to her breasts. There will be other babies, she cooed, rocking back and forth. Mara Joy sat straight up and looked at her mother, holding back real tears of sorrow. No, Mama, there will be no babies, she cried. The doctor said if I do. She stopped, seeing the look of horror on her mother's face. Go on, JoBeth whispered, her eyes downcast, not wanting to hear that her baby would never hold her own in her arms. If I did, Mara Joy sobbed, it would kill me next time. She looked into her mother's eyes and, with all her heart, asked, What am I going to tell Chad? She looked up at the blue ceiling. The images of the child she was to have burst like frail bubbles before her eyes. He so wanted children of his own. He was hoping I would get pregnant right away. Now, he'll never have a son, and I'll never have a daughter. Mara Joy, JoBeth said, seizing her by the shoulders and hugging her tightly. I don't know what to say, my darling. This is just so unfair. My heart is breaking. How do I make it stop? I can't handle the pain, Mama. Please, make it stop. Mara Joy implored, her heart breaking into a million pieces as she pounded her weak fist against her thighs. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying desperately to stem the wave of anguish that threatened to overwhelm her. I can't, Mara Joy. I can't, JoBeth sobbed, hugging her tightly. And she couldn't. JoBeth couldn't fix what was ailing her this time, no matter how much she wished she could. For the first time in Mara Joy's life, she couldn't get what she wanted, and the one thing she secretly wanted most was a baby of her own.